Okay, so Fourth String Podcast back live. Have not done this in forever. I have probably had one of the best weekends ever watching college football this past weekend, and I felt inspired to the podcast again. We've got the job carousel in full effect. We have the portal that's back. We've got all sorts of drama happened this past weekend with flags being planted and everything, and it's just everything you love about the sport. So I want to start off real quick with the playoff and talk about that. I'm not gonna give you a full 12 team ranking, quite frankly, because that's what everybody else does, and I just don't feel like that provides any value. But let's talk about the main point of the discussion. South Carolina, Alabama, and Ole Miss are fighting over the last playoff spot. So the fact that they are fighting over that spot, we're going to focus on those three teams. Now, South Carolina has an argument because if you look at these three teams, the past, I'd say 4 weeks, they have been playing the absolute best football. And quite frankly, I don't think it's been close. If you look at what they've done the past 4 weeks, they just went on the road to Clemson. I don't care what Clemson is. That is a very, very good team to go on the road and beat. They beat Missouri at home. Missouri was fighting for their lives in that game. They finished 9-3. They played Texas A&M. Texas A&M had it close with Texas in the fourth quarter of that game. So if your thought is, well, Texas is one of the top teams in the country, I mean, Texas A&M's not in the playoff, obviously, nor should they be, but they gave them a little bit of a fight there in the fourth. South Carolina blew the doors off of them, 44-20. They went at Oklahoma, won 35-9. Even if you go back to the Alabama game, which they lost, again, at Alabama, they only lost by 2 points. So we'll come back to that later because that's an important game. But like if you look at South Carolina, these past really second half of the year, there is maybe not a team in college football that is as hot as they are. It's really tough, really, really tough to make an argument to leave them out. But then you've got this factor. They lost head to head to Alabama and they lost head to head with Ole Miss. Again, I don't think head to head has to mean everything. I think people, they get so hung up on this team lost a game to this team. And so we have to put the team that won that game into the playoff. I don't think you absolutely have to do that. And so if you look at Ole Miss's total resume, they lost to Kentucky. Kentucky's awful. Kentucky's one of the worst teams in college football in Power Four. They're awful. They went 4-8. This is not a traditional football program, and in the past 10 years, this is one of the worst seasons they've ever had. So you're taking one of the worst programs in all of Power Four, and they've got one of the worst seasons they've had in a long, long time. Mark Stoops typically overperforms there. The game was at Ole Miss in Oxford, and they lost to Kentucky. That's inexcusable. There are just some games I don't think you can lose. And if you're in this type of bubble spot, be able to have the benefit of the doubt. Now, they lost at LSU. That one I'll give them. That one doesn't bother me. They lost by 3 points at a ranked LSU team. I know we've made fun of Brian Kelly all year. It's not been the season they wanted. They still went 8-4. It's still a good football team. And they lost at Florida. Again, that's just Florida's an awful team. Florida went 7-5, 4-4 in conference play. You can't lose that game. Now, their saving grace, though, is they beat Georgia handedly, 28-10. Handedly beat Georgia. But when you follow it up with losing at Florida, and then if you watched Ole Miss this past weekend, they played Mississippi State and they played them at home. That game was close. Going into half, I think Mississippi State led that game at halftime. People need to realize Mississippi State is a team that went 2-10. Mississippi State got absolutely shellacked by Toledo in the third week of the season, 41-17. Got shellacked by Toledo. They were destroyed by every other team not named Massachusetts or Eastern Kentucky. Destroyed. And here's Ole Miss playing a close game with them. You can't do that. So it was 17-14 at halftime. My bad. Mississippi State didn't have the lead. Ole Miss had a 3-point lead. You can't do that. Mississippi State is awful. And I know it's a rivalry, all that. That's BS. That doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean what you think it does in terms of a team that bad being able to beat a playoff team. I don't care what kind of rivalry it is. That game should have never been close. And so, yes, I'm going to count that game against you if I'm not going to penalize you for having a close loss to LSU. I'm absolutely going to do that. And so I looked at Ole Miss this year, and I'm really not that impressed. If you look at what Ole Miss did, aside from that Georgia game, they crushed Furman. They crushed Middle Tennessee State. They crushed Wake Forest, who ended up being awful, and they crushed Georgia Southern. The rest of their season, lost to Kentucky, beat South Carolina. That's a good win. Went on the road. South Carolina won that game 27-3. Lost to LSU. They beat Oklahoma, struggled against Oklahoma, who was not very good. They went 6-6. Beat Arkansas. That's fine. Arkansas is Arkansas, 6-6 team. They beat Georgia. So they've got 2 good wins on their resume. That's it. And so then there's the other team, Alabama, who also 9-3. All 3 of these programs 9-3. So we look at Alabama's resume. Again, they beat South Carolina. We'll come back to that in a second. They lost to Vanderbilt. Now, I know Vanderbilt had this magical year, and it felt like, okay, Vanderbilt's like, they're a real thing. They're this really good team. At the end of the day, Vanderbilt was 6-6 and 3-5 in conference play. There is no excuse for a playoff caliber team to go to Nashville and lose to Alabama or lose to Vanderbilt. Zero excuse. You cannot lose that game and get into this playoff. Cannot do it. Now, they did bounce back, and they beat South Carolina the week after that by 2. They did bounce back and beat Missouri later on by 34, crushed them, and they did go into LSU and absolutely murder them. But they followed all of that up by losing to Oklahoma, 6-6 on the year, 2-6 in conference play, lost 24-3. Offense didn't even have a pulse. And then there's this past weekend. They play Auburn. Now, Auburn, again, terrible year. Coach has one foot out the door, either by design or they're pushing him out the door. I don't know, but Hugh Freeze will not be there much longer. Can guarantee you that. It's either this year or next year, and he's out of Auburn. He will not be there beyond next year. He's got one foot out the door. They don't know who the quarterback is. I mean, legitimately, it's like Auburn has no passing attack. And Alabama struggled in that game. It was 28-14. Could not put them away. Again, if I look at Alabama the past 3 weeks, I'm like, I don't know what they do that's great. Legitimately, all of Alabama's greatness this year happened at Bryant-Denny. Well, you're not getting a home game because you're not winning the SEC. So if I can't see that you're great outside of Bryant-Denny, why do you deserve a spot in this playoff? You lost at Tennessee. You lost at Oklahoma. You lost at Vanderbilt. Alabama's really not done anything to me that proves they can go on the road and win a big game. Now, they did beat LSU. That's fine. They went 8-4. But LSU's not in the playoff spot. That's a fine win. But, I mean, again, people are trying to run Brian Kelly out of town. So I don't look at that that win, and it's not as impressive to me. Like, that can't be your hallmark win. And the Georgia win, great win. We all watched that game. You remember Alabama got off to this insane start. Looked like they were going to blow Georgia out of the water. And Georgia bounced back, fought really hard in that game, and it ended up being really close. There was a moment late we thought Georgia would pull it off. So really, you're a couple minutes away from Georgia's offense, which was rolling, finding a way to win that game. You're a couple minutes away from being 8-4 instead of 9-3, and you're not in this discussion. Now, all of this to say, Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, the truth is, this is exactly what I say during March Madness as well. If you are on the bubble spot, if you are in that last 4 in, first 4 out, or in this case, it's going to be like last 2 in, first 2 out, or whatever it comes up to be. If you are in that spot, you do not deserve a spot in the playoff. If you get in, it is because of the grace of the committee for letting you in. Whatever the committee decides to do between these 3 teams, they are splitting hairs. There is not a surefire, we have the argument to end all arguments that puts one of these teams ahead of the other. Ole Miss, you got the head to head, sure, but your losses are so bad, Florida and Kentucky, it completely rules out you having a head to head advantage. Completely rules it out. Alabama, same thing. You got the head to head against South Carolina. That's fine. You didn't play Ole Miss, but you got the head to head against South Carolina. Again, fine. But you lost to Oklahoma by 3 scores and lost to Vanderbilt. That puts you in this position. Now, South Carolina is interesting. South Carolina lost to both teams head to head. The loss at Alabama was in Bryant-Denny, and they only lost by 2. Now, if you ask any Vegas odds maker, what is Alabama's home field advantage, they would tell you it's more than 2 points. It's probably close to about 5 to 6 points of a sway. Basically meaning if teams were even on neutral site, but they played in Bryant-Denny, Alabama would be favored by 6 points simply because they're playing in Bryant-Denny. So it's about a touchdown edge. And South Carolina went into that game and only lost by 2. Now, one of their other losses was a 3-point loss to LSU early in the season. Now, what I would say about that game, about that loss to LSU, is this year, one of the biggest themes has been how poorly officiating has been all season. And it has been, in my opinion, the worst officiated season in the history of the sport. It's been that bad. That game stood head and shoulders above every game as the worst officiated game in the worst officiated season. And South Carolina's quarterback, Lenora Sellers, went out midway through that game. So he's been the star player. They didn't have him. They've had him the past several weeks, and they have looked like one of the best teams in the country with him behind center. So I think if we're going to go off of precedent, which last year we didn't include Florida State because their quarterback was out, we have to take into consideration that South Carolina lost one of their games because their quarterback was out. And with that quarterback, they've been a completely different team. I'm fine with that being taken into consideration last year. And I thought it was proven in the bowl game, excuse me, it was proven in the bowl game that the committee had a valid point in not including Florida State because Jordan Travis was not playing. But if you're going to have that argument last year, you have to bring it back up this year that South Carolina, one of these teams, was missing their star player. I'm like dying on the podcast. It's fine. All right, so Ryan Day loses to Michigan this year. Again. And so now we're talking about 4 straight years of Ryan Day losing this game. And I think I think Ohio State fans are over it at this point. I think they have hit their line, they've hit their threshold, and you can't continue to lose this game. And people continue to tell them that not only is Ryan Day the right coach for them, but that he is this genius savant of a coach. And they should be lucky to have him. This is Ohio State. You either come in and you win championships or you're gone. And the reason they have validity to have that expectation is because if you look at the Midwest, they recruit like an SEC school. They have all the resources of an SEC school. They have the financial capacity of it. There's some financial support of an SEC school. They have all of that, but they're in an area where they can pick out any recruit they want. If there's a player in Virginia, Ohio State can take him. Travion Henderson played right here in Virginia. Virginia Tech couldn't get him. UVA couldn't get him. Penn State couldn't even come in and get him. Ohio State said, no, we want that player. Ohio State can go into Pennsylvania. They go into Virginia. They go into Ohio. They go into West Virginia. They can even go into Kentucky, in Indiana. They go into parts of Michigan, and whatever player they want, they can take. They don't run into too much issue with Michigan because Michigan is so academically rigid and has not been the rules at all for anybody that there are players Ohio State will take that Michigan will not take. So the recruiting edge at Ohio State is far and away better than anybody in the Big Ten. And it's why when they play teams like Indiana or Iowa or Illinois or anybody like that, they just roll them. It's why every time they play Penn State, they just destroy them because the recruiting edge that Ohio State has is far superior to any other program in their conference, which is why this loss to Michigan is absolutely unacceptable. And I think Ohio State fans are tired of being told we had this amazing coach when he can't win the one game of the season that might give him a little bit of a challenge, and he can't win it. And this is a program that there are two things you have to do on a fairly consistent basis, and that is be in the championship conversation and beat Michigan. And they expect if you're gonna play Michigan 10 times, they expect you will win 7 of those 10 times. That is the expectation at Ohio State because of the resources they have by comparison to other programs. So if that's the expectation, then Ohio State fans right now are livid with Ryan Day and livid with the media for telling them that Ryan Day's been this amazing coach, because he hasn't. Now, here's the thing that gets very interesting for Ohio State. Do you fire him today? You're about to go into the playoff. So if you fire him today, well, now Chip Kelly's your guy. And so you're going to go into the playoff with Chip Kelly. And is that really who you want to be your interim head coach going into the playoff? And if you look at this team, there's been moments this season where everybody has thought Ohio State's the best team in the country. And if you look at the rest of the country right now, nobody believes anybody's great. And the team that everybody has ranked number 1, you did go to Oregon, had them on the ropes, and if not for a rule that doesn't exist anymore, you would win that game. So, I mean, there's enough momentum, there's enough excitement, there's enough belief to say you want to keep Ryan Day. But here's the thing that I think they're a little bit afraid of. Let's say SMU wins the ACC championship and you're playing SMU in the first round. Well, if you ask me SMU versus Ohio State, who wins that game, I'm 100% taking Ohio State. If you ask me Ohio State versus Boise State, who wins that game, I'm 100% taking Ohio State. If you ask me Ohio State versus Arizona State, who wins that game, I'm 100% taking Ohio State. 100%. And there's a good chance you're going to get one of those teams in the first round. And then potentially, because the fourth highest ranked conference champion gets that bye week, potentially get them in the second round. So you're talking about potentially getting Southern Methodist or getting Boise State or Arizona State or one of those teams in the first round, getting another one of those teams in the second round, and going into the semifinals, and then potentially playing Notre Dame and getting knocked out right away in the semifinals. And I think that would be worst case scenario for Ohio State, because you would win just enough games where it's like, are you going to fire your coach after you just made the semifinals? But you're also going to look at it and go, well, we still didn't win a big game. We only ever beat teams that have inferior recruits to what we have. SMU, Boise State, Arizona State, Indiana, those Penn State, those don't have the recruits that we have. They don't have the players that we have. And so if you win 2 of those games just to be able to make a playoff run, but then you get beat by the one good team you play in the semifinals, I don't think you're going to feel any better. But you're also going to have a really, really tough time convincing the administration that they should move off of a guy that just took the team to the semifinals. Because then what are the expectations just too high at Ohio State if that's the case? Are they too high? And so I think these are very valid questions that Ohio State is going to be faced with over these next few weeks. And then if you fire Ohio State, I mean, I think they'd have their choice in whatever candidate they want, essentially. But is there a candidate you believe in that would lead your program to where you want to go? And I'm not sure. I mean, everybody wants Mike Vrabel. See, that's the thing. Is some of these NFL guys, Mike Vrabel can have an NFL job. Are we sure he wants to come to college football and coach players where there's a super high roster turnover? is I just don't know that these NFL guys want to take that step. I think you're going to see a lot more guys say, okay, I want to get away from college football and go into the NFL. And so what's happening right now in the transfer portal, which this is a great segue. What's happening right now in the transfer portal is really, really, I don't know if sad's the word, but it's deeply concerning for the future of the sport. And here's why. Every year you're going to have, so everybody's got a roster of about 100 players, right? There's 85 scholarships. You typically have 10 to 15 walk-ons, 10 are preferred, 5 just happen to walk onto the roster. Okay. So you've really got a roster. Everybody's got a roster of about 100 players for the most part. Every year you're going to have 15 to 20 players graduate from your program. So right off the bat, we're talking 15% roster turnover at a minimum. Then you add on the transfer portal. And most teams are seeing upwards of 20 to 25 players leaving in the transfer portal. And so right now, the average roster turnover in college football is 35%. 35%. And if you think about college football, now college basketball, you may have high roster turnover, but basketball is more chemistry than it is teaching a playbook, teaching a system, teaching a philosophy, and really even just the basics of this running back subs in at this time, this running back subs in at this time, this offensive line subs in, and oh, by the way, he's an eligible receiver, and just all the little intricacies that come with college sports. And now you've got to completely reteach that to essentially half of your roster every single year. Now, to top all of that off, these coaches, because of the early signing period, are flying all around the country year round. They do not get days off. They do not get weekends off. They do not get to go to the baseball game and watch their kid play. They don't get that. They are traveling all across the country to recruit because recruiting right now is essentially 24/7. And with NIL, it's gone completely bonkers. Which, again, if we want to talk, argue about whether or not NIL should be right or wrong, whatever, that's an argument for another day. Regardless of your feelings on NIL, regardless of whether or not players should have a right to it, I just want to talk about the coach's life with this because I don't think this is a talked about enough topic. 35% of your roster is turning over. You've been recruiting all across the country, flying, missing games, missing that time with your family because you're worried about replacing a linebacker that's graduating, only to find out that the defensive end at the end of the season is also entering the transfer portal. And so now the linebacker that you've been working to replace all year long, you've got that guy, but now you got to go replace that defensive end too. And I just think it is so incredibly complicated. And so one of the things I saw this past weekend is Gus Malzahn stepped down from Central Florida as the head coach and became the offensive coordinator at Florida State. Now, on the surface, you could go, okay, well, Central Florida, the program's been bad the past couple of years. This year was terrible. They went 4-8. I mean, it was absolutely awful. They went 4-8. He's getting a little bit older, so maybe this is just kind of him phasing out of the game. I don't know that it's that. I think this is twofold because if you look last year, we had something very similar. We had Chip Kelly step down as head coach of UCLA and take over as the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. This is unprecedented. We have not seen in years before where head coaches at what would be perceived as good programs or at least desirable programs, Central Florida and UCLA, just decide they're going to step down and become offensive coordinators instead. And I think this is happening for two reasons. The first reason is because I think these coaches are looking at it going, boy, life as an offensive coordinator or as the defensive coordinator is way better than the life of a head coach at a program like a UCLA or Central Florida, because I don't have the pressure. I don't have those same responsibilities. I'm not required to be traveling, and I don't have to worry so much about all the roster turnover. Yes, I'm affected by it, but it's the head coach's job to ensure we have a roster replacement. It's not my main priority. My main priority is game planning and scheming the offense and scheming the defense. And so I think some of these guys are looking at it like, I don't want that responsibility if I'm being left with UCLA and Central Florida's budget. These jobs would have been seen 10 years ago as potentially good jobs given their recent track record. But in this environment that we're in right now, this environment makes those jobs awful. Nobody wants to be the head coach of UCLA right now because UCLA has absolutely $0 for a collective. They've got no money in their collective. They aren't going out and getting anybody. Central Florida has one of the worst collectives in all of Power Four. They're not going to go get anybody. So Central Florida, I mean, Gus Malzahn's leaving that job because the expectations are through the roof and they don't have the money to go get the recruits they need. And the recruits that they are getting, the players that they are getting that pop are all transferring. And so what do you do? Like, you're going to develop these kids. You're going to go develop these 2- and 3-star recruits to be able to play at a level that gets Central Florida somewhat competitive. And then as soon as they start performing well, you have a Iowa State come along or a Florida State come along and say, yeah, we're going to give you $200,000. And Central Florida can't match. Central Florida cannot compete right now with NIL. Central Florida, I'm telling you right now, that program is going to suffer really badly over the next 5 to 10 years because they do not have the collective some of these other programs have. They don't have a collective, I think, to be a top 5 group of 5 team. I think it's going to be really, really tough sledding for them. They're talking about bringing back Scott Frost. They should go for it. If he's interested, you go get Scott Frost because I just do not see how they are going to be a competitive team in the Big 12 with that collective. Somebody's going to have to step up and be a big donor for them to be a player because it's not happening otherwise. And so I think some of these coaches are looking at it. Now, the second reason I think they're transferring is because if you look at the route to a big-time head coaching job, and I'm talking Notre Dame, Penn State, Tennessee, Ohio State, Michigan, Bama, USC. If you look at the route, historically the route has been you get a head coaching job, you win some at a lower tier school, then you take a team kind of like at the lower part of one of the Power 5 programs, like a UVA or something, you win big there, and then you get hired onto the bigger job. That's typically been the track record. You got to be a head coach at a small school, then go to a lower tier Power 4 school, then you get one of the elite head coaching jobs. And now what's happening is these elite jobs are not hiring head coaches from group of 5 or from the lower Power 4 teams. A lot of them are promoting from within. Michigan just did this. Notre Dame did this a couple years ago. They promoted Marcus Freeman. And so I think Chip Kelly last year looked at Ohio State and said, okay, let me do one of two things. I'm going to take the Ohio State job. Maybe it works out great. Ryan Day gets an opportunity to go coach NFL. He leaves. I can become the head coach at Ohio State. Or even if it doesn't work out great, he might get fired midway through the season. I could take over on an interim basis. Maybe we get on a winning streak and I get the Ohio State job. Look at what just happened at East Carolina, where they fired their coach midway through the season. They bring in a defensive coordinator. He wins over all the players. The players are begging the AD to hire this guy, and they hire him. And I think they made the right decision. I think Chip Kelly very well looked at Ohio State and said, that might be my path to getting an elite head coaching job. Me going 7-5, 8-4 at UCLA is not going to move the needle. And I think same thing, Gus Malzahn at Central Florida. Now, does he win it? I don't know. Gus Malzahn's a little bit older, but Gus Malzahn now goes to Florida State. Again, think about it. Both of these guys went to programs who have coaches with a seat that's warming up and an elite program. That is what they've gone to, where they've said, okay, I'm not going to be head coach. I'm going to be a coordinator. And again, Florida State, what if they get off to like a 1-4 head start next year? Who are they going to make the interim head coach? Well, Gus Malzahn, because he's been a head coach before. So he'll be the interim. If they win 7 games and win out and they end the year 8-4 and all those players are excited and they're not going to transfer, what do you think Florida State's going to do? Gus Malzahn, you're our coach for the next 5 years. They're going to hire, they'll give him the head coaching job. And so I think this is going to be a new thing in college football where you see head coaches leave not to become head coaches at bigger programs, but literally to become coordinators at some of these bigger programs because that's a better route to getting the head coaching job. And I'm fascinated by it. Fascinated by it because I think we've got a new precedent happening right now in college football, and with the way this portal is working, um, it's something I think a lot of coaches are going to consider. Now, something else with this portal. So we had a wild weekend in college football, absolutely wild weekend between all the. I mean, we had some crazy games. We had some snow games with Missouri, and then we had flags being planted at midfield. And so everybody's upset about it. Honestly, I watched it over the weekend. We've had fights in college football before. This is nothing new. This sport is tribal, it's passion, it's weird, it's unique, it's history, it's tradition, it's all of those things. And so when I see this, I'm not bothered by it. What I think a lot of times people forget with college football, and Colin Cowherd went on like this whole rant today about all this stuff, and how NCAA's got to clean it up. Colin Cowherd's not been relatable with college football in forever. I mean, he just hasn't. And this is a perfect example why. When Tennessee plays Ole Miss, or when Tennessee plays Florida, it is not Tennessee football versus Florida football. It is Tennessee's way of life versus Florida's way of life. It is Georgia's way of life versus Alabama's way of life. It is Ohio State's way of life versus Michigan's way of life. And so when Michigan goes to Ohio State and beats them at Ohio State, they're planting that flag because they're telling you our way of life trumps your way of life. Our people, our cities, the way we do things is better than the way you do things. It is deeply personal and tribal. And that is part of why people pay so much attention to college football. And I think for something to be truly entertaining, there's got to be a level of uncomfortability with it. Baseball is way too comfortable. That's why nobody watches, because it's just way too comfortable. The NBA's gotten to be like this. It's way too comfortable. There's no conflict. If you take the conflict out of sports, it loses its edge. Edge is really, really, really important. Really important. And I mean, the NCAA is finding these schools. That's fine. Whatever. I don't think as a player you're really paying any attention to it. What I will say about this, though, and this is the part about the portal that concerns me the most. Nick Pierce, if you don't follow him, great guy, does play-by-play for Liberty, does PA for the Panthers. He had this amazing tweet today. He said, "What's funny to me about the college football flag planting deal is half or more of the guys in those fights are defending a logo or field they won't even be attached to in a week." And that's true. And that's what I think is so disconcerting about the portal is like what makes a sport special is the conflict and the passion and the tribal and the people and the uniqueness and the weirdness. And what we saw this weekend was all of that on display. But all of that's gone when these kids go into the portal. And I think the NCAA, I don't care about the fights and stuff. Like, yes, ideally, I like players and coaches and everybody to be protected and all that stuff. Yes, 100%. But I don't think the NCAA's main concern should be fixing that. I think the NCAA's main concern should be fixing the portal and making sure that what happened on Saturday is protected and not completely prevented. Because this sport is as popular as it's ever been. And right now, we're gearing up for a super exciting playoff, and I can't wait to see it. Last thought. We're doing a new segment, I think. Talk about a coach the media loves, I can't stand. I don't know what to call this segment. We'll figure out a name. Everybody's obsessed with Mario Cristobal. And this weekend, Ryan Day took a lot of heat, and it was deserving. But Mario Cristobal deserved way more heat. And Mario Cristobal is a really good recruiter. That's all Cristobal is. That's all he's ever been. I think that's all he's ever going to be. He is not a great coach. He has never been a great coach. He had a 21-0 lead at Syracuse and squandered it. And it's going to cost his team a chance in the playoff, and it absolutely should. Miami should not be in the playoff. If they get in the playoff, we riot. They should not be in the playoff. And the one issue that he has had as a head coach is his teams are never as buttoned up as you want them to be. Never as buttoned up. He can recruit well. He can pump guys up. But in terms of being a dynamic game planner, in terms of being prepared, in terms of understanding the rules and everything else that goes into the sport and having a savvy game plan, Cristobal does not have any of that. That is not who he is. That's not who he's been designed to be. And quite frankly, I think for Miami, he's probably temporarily a good fit because he's bringing in players they have not had in a long time. Now, that's good. Miami needs that. But if Miami wants to take the next step as a program, at some point they're going to have to look at Cristobal and say, you're not the guy. Because what you saw on Saturday, unfortunately, that has been Cristobal's history as a head coach, is losing games in that fashion. Go ask Oregon, go ask Florida International, because that is exactly what he did at both of those programs. And that is why, as a coach, he is barely above 500. That's it. Have a good night.